Hi soulmates, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jacinta. If this is your first time here, thank you for stopping by. In this YouTube channel I share sewing tutorials, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to cut and sew this corporate dress from German wears. If it's what you love to learn, kindly watch till the end. If you're yet to subscribe, please turn the subscribe button below and also turn on the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Without wasting much time, let's get started with this tutorial. These are the fabrics I'll be making use of. They are crepe fabric and I have a total of 2.5 yards here. The baby pink fabric is 1.5 yards, while the milk fabric for the sleeves the upper part is 1 yard. Starting off with the pattern drafting, from the tip of my pattern paper, I'll mark 1 inch downwards and square across, and I'll label that line, my shoulder line. I'll be using this pattern paper to draft the front and the back sides, so I'll be demarcating it into 2 equal parts. I'll be using this side as the front side. So placing my tape on the shoulder line, I'll mark 9.5 inches downwards for my bust line and at 15 inches for my half length. I'll square across and label these lines. On the shoulder line, I will mark 7.5 inches inwards from the center front, which is half of my shoulder measurement, and come downwards by 1 inch from my shoulder line for my shoulder slope. Still on the shoulder line, I will mark 3.5 inches inwards for the neck width and 3.5 inches downwards for the neck depth, and connect with a curved line for my front neckline. I will also connect the neck width to the 1 inch shoulder slope. From the 1 inch shoulder slope I came down by, I will mark 7 inches downwards for my armhole level and connect with a straight line. At the point where the armhole level ended, I will extend the line outward and label that my chest line. From my half length, I'll mark 9 inches downwards my hip line and square across, and I'll also label it. From the half length, I'll mark 25 inches downwards, which is my knee line and also where I want this dress to stop. So go ahead and input your desired dress length measurement. Afterwards, I'll square across and I'll label also, and I'll add extra 1.5 inches to that full length. This 1.5 inches is for folding the hem. Afterwards, I'll square across and label the lines. For the dart, I'll be marking a straight dart and side bust dart. So if you don't want to make use of this kind of dart, go ahead and mark your desired kind of dart. At the half length, I will mark 3.5 inches inwards from the center front. I'll do the same on the bust line and on the hip line and connect with a straight line. On the dart line, I will mark 1 inch downwards from the bust line, and on the half length, I will mark 0.75 inches on both sides of the dart line. Also on the dart line, I will mark 6 inches downwards from the half length. Then I will connect the 0.75 inches I marked on both sides of the dart line upwards to the 1 inch I came downwards by, and downwards to the 6 inches I marked. For my armhole curve, I'll mark the midpoint of this straight line, and on that midpoint, I'll come in by ½ inch and mark part of my bust circumference on the chest line. Then use my curve ruler to connect from the shoulder slope to the ½ inch I came in by to part of my bust circumference on the chest line. I'll mark 1.5 inches on the chest line for my sewing allowance, and on the bust line, I will also mark the same measurement I marked on the chest line, part of my bust circumference and 1.5 inches for sewing allowance. On the half length, I'll mark part of my waist circumference, replace the 1.5 inches dart and add 1.5 inches sewing allowance, making it 3 inches allowance. On the hip line, I will mark part of my hip circumference and add 1.5 inches sewing allowance. On the full length, I will minus 2 inches from my hip circumference and mark part of whatever I get there, and I'll also add 1.5 inches sewing allowance. Afterwards, I'll connect this point and cut it out. After cutting out the front pattern, at the side front, I will mark 2 inches downwards from the bust line and connect it to the dart line on the bust line like so. This is my side bust dart. Now for the back pattern, I've already ruled the shoulder line. Placing my tape on the shoulder line, I will mark 9.5 inches downwards for my bust line and 13 inches for my back half length. The front half length and the back half length are not the same. The front half length is 15 inches. The difference between the front and back half length is 2 inches. That is the 2 inches we marked for our side bust dart. So I'll mark 13 inches as my back half length. Afterwards, I'll square across and label the lines. Placing my tape on the half length, I'll mark 9 inches downwards for my hip line and 25 inches for the full length, and I'll also add the 1.5 inches for my folding allowance. Afterwards, I'll square across these lines and label them. my zip allowance, I will mark 1 inch inwards from the center front, from the shoulder to the full length, and connect with a straight line. All the measurements I'll be marking will be starting from this line. On the shoulder line, I'll mark off of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches, and I'll mark 3.5 inches inwards for my neck width and 1.5 inches downwards for my back neck depth, and connect with a curved line. Then for my shoulder slope, I'll come downwards by 1 inch. I marked 1.5 inches here, but I later corrected it to 1 inch. Then after marking the shoulder slope, I'll connect it to my neck width. From the 1 inch shoulder slope, I'll mark 7 inches downwards for my armhole level and connect with a straight line. On the point where the armhole level ended, I will extend the line. I label that my chest line. Then I'll find the midpoint of this straight line. On that midpoint, I'll come in by 1/2 inch. And on the chest line, I will mark what of my bust circumference. Then use my curved ruler to connect from the shoulder slope to the 1/2 inch I came in by to put up my bust circumference on the chest line to form my armhole curve. Now for my dart, I'll mark 3.5 inches inwards on the bust line, half length, and on the hip line, and connect with a straight line. I'll extend the dart line upwards by 2 inches. From the half length, I'll mark 6 inches downwards on the dart line. On the half length, I will mark 0.75 inches on both sides of the dart line and connect it upwards to that 2 inches I extended, and downwards to the 6 inches I marked up. Now I'm going to impute quarter of my round body measurement. I already have quarter of my bust circumference on the chest line, so I'll add 1.5 inches of sewing allowance. On the half length, I will mark quarter of my waist circumference, replace this 1.5 inches dart, and add extra 1.5 inches sewing allowance, making it 3 inches on the waistline. On the hip line, I will mark quarter of my hip circumference and add 1.5 inches sewing allowance. On the full length, I will minus 2 inches for my hip circumference and mark the quarter of whatever it gave me, and I'll add extra 1.5 inches sewing allowance. Afterwards, I'll connect the marks. At the center back on the zip allowance, I will mark 1/2 inch on the half length and connect it upwards to the neck depth and downwards to the hip line like so. Afterwards, I'll go ahead and cut this out. While cutting, I'll add 1/2 inch on the shoulder for joining of the front and back shoulders.
Bring me into golden sunlight. If I'm going with you, I know we'll get to the other side. Sinking in, I know this feels right. Catching a crazy love.
Now I'm going to be marking out the parts where I'll be combining the second fabric. To do that, I'll cut out the half length of the front pattern. I'll get a new pattern paper and fold it into 2. Then I'll place this one that I've cut out on it. I will add 1/2 inch on the neckline for turning, and I'll go ahead and cut it out. After cutting, I will indicate where the bust line is on the new pattern paper. I'll open up the new pattern paper and square across the bust line. One side of the chest line, you can choose any side. I'll come downwards by 1 inch. That is the armhole. I'll come downwards by 1 inch from the armhole. And on the other side of the armhole, I will mark 1/2 inch downwards from the shoulder. You know, we added 1/2 inch for joining of the front and back shoulder, so I will remove that 1/2 inch, and from that 1/2 inch I will mark 3 inches downwards. Afterwards, I'll connect the 3 inches to the 1 inch I came downwards by on the other side of the armhole like so, and I will go ahead and cut it out. Now for my sleeve, this is a long puff sleeve, so the length of this sleeve is going to be longer than my actual sleeve length, and the round sleeve also is going to be wider than my actual round sleeve. So I'll be working with 25 inches, though this paper is 24 inches. When I'm cutting on my fabric, I'm going to complete it. I'm going to add extra 1 inch. Placing my tape on the tip of the pattern paper, I'm going to mark 4.5 inches downwards. This is my bicep line, and I'll square across. Then I'll take the measurement of my armhole, minusing 1/2 inch. I'll take the measurement of my armhole. What I have is 9 inches, so I'm going to mark that 9 inches on this bicep line and connect it to the tip of my pattern paper with a slanted line like so. I'll mark the midpoint of this slanted line. With my curved ruler, I'll connect from the tip of my pattern paper to that midpoint, and on the other side I'll connect from the midpoint to my biceps line. Afterwards, I'm going to retake the measurement to make sure it aligns with the 9 inches I got as my armhole. So so it was more than I had to remark that 9 inches, and then I reconnected it like this. Then on the full length, I'm going to be making use of the width I have here on my paper. So what I have is 11 inches, so that is 22 inches when I cut it on fold. Okay, so I'm just going to connect from that bicep line to the end of my paper like this. Afterwards, I'll go ahead and cut it out. What I'm going to do now is to cut each of these pattern pieces on my fabric. I don't want mine to have joining at the half length, so that is why I'm cutting it this way. The only joining it to have at the bodies is the combination at the upper part. So if you want yours to have joining at the half length, you can go ahead and cut the upper part separate and the skirt part separate. If you don't also want joining, you can do it exactly the way I'm doing mine. Remember to add ½ inch at the upper part for joining of the other fabric. This is the second part of the upper front part. So I've placed it on my fabric. I'm going to be cutting it out, and I'll add ½ inch at the bottom part for joining to the other side of the front. I forgot that I added ½ inch on the neckline. I went to add another ½ inch. If you added ½ inch while on your pattern paper, there will be no need adding ½ inch again. I was done cutting, so this is how I'm going to be joining it to the other parts of the front piece. I've also cut the back side, as you can see. Now for the second off shoulder sleeve, I'm going to mark 13.5 inches. So my arm measurement is 12.5. 1 inch will be for joining to the armhole. Okay, and the wideness is going to be 4 inches. So I'll just go ahead and cut this out. So this off shoulder sleeve is only on one side of the sleeve. I've also gone ahead to cut the puff sleeves and the facing I'll use to turn the front and back neckline. I was done cutting. What I'm going to do now is to place my pattern on the fabric and trace out the dart with my tracing wheel. After tracing, I'll use my pencil to mark it on my fabric so that it will be more visible. I'm going to do the same for the front dart, and I'll also trace the side bust dart for the front. I'll go over to my machine now and sew these darts that I've marked on both the front and on the back. I'll also close the upper part of this off shoulder sleeve using ½ inch. I was done sewing the darts of the front and the back piece, and this is what it looks like. You can see. What I'm going to do now is to join the shoulders of the front and back separately, and I'll also join the shoulders of the facing separately. So I'll place the front and back piece front facing each other and join the shoulders using ½ inch. I'll do the same for the facing. After joining the shoulders, I'm going to iron the darts and open press the joinings on the shoulder. I've also closed this off shoulder sleeve. I'll turn it to the right side and iron it. And for this puff sleeve, I'm going to mark 1.5 inch. Then I'm going to fold it this way. This is where I'm going to be inserting my elastic. I was done ironing and joining the shoulders. What I'm going to do now is to turn the neckline with the facing. So I'm going to place the facing and the main fabric front facing front, making sure that the necklines align. The shoulders of the facing must meet the shoulders of the main fabric. You can see I'm taking my time to pin it very well. After pinning, I will go ahead and join the two using ½ inch. Then turn it over to the wrong side and iron it so that it will relax. I was done turning the neckline. What I'm going to do now is to attach the sleeves. So I'm going to start by placing this off shoulder sleeve from where the pink fabric started from, so that it will match the pink sleeve. I will measure from the shoulder to where that pink started from. So it's 3 inches. I'm going to mark that 3 inches at the back, and that is where the other side of the sleeve is going to be. So I'll also pin it. I will also join the puff sleeve. So I'll notch the center of the puff sleeve and place it on the shoulder, I'll use 1/2 inch to join it on both sides of the armhole. I was done joining the sleeves and this is what it looks like. What I'm going to do now is to insert the elastic. So the elastic I'm using is 1/2 inch wide. I'm going to minus 1 inch from my round wrist measurement. Okay, so what I'll be using is 6.5 inches for the length of my elastic. So I'll use my safety pin to insert it into the channels I've created on the bottom part of the puff sleeve. I'll stitch it down on both ends to form this gathered effect. I was done with that and this is what it looks like. What I'm going to do now is to close the zip side and attach my zip. I will mark 7 inches upwards from the full length for my slit and 20 inches downwards from the neckline of the back for my zip. Then the remaining part I'm going to be closing it using 1 inch. I'm also going to fold the hem with the 1 inch allowance we added. I was done attaching my zips. The last thing I'm going to do to this dress is to close these two sides using the 1.5 inch allowance we added. I'll place the front and back side front facing each other and pin the two sides, making sure that they are equal on every side. Okay, even the sleeves, I'm going to pin it. I'm going to mark 1.5 inch on the two sides. And on the sleeve I'm going to mark 1 inch. After marking, I'll go to my machine and sew on the lines that I've marked, and that will be all for the cutting and sewing of this dress. If you find this video helpful and you've learned something, please drop a comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It goes a long way to encourage me to drop more tutorials. Thanks for watching and see you guys in my next tutorial.